The October rain was coming down sideways across the parking lot of a Denny's off I-25 in Colorado Springs, and I was sitting in my car at 11 at night, watching a woman I had never met cry into her hands in the booth by the window. She was the one who told me the truth. Not my husband, not the affair, her. And when she looked up and found my eyes through the glass, I felt something in my chest just stop. Like a clock that had been ticking too loud for years, finally went quiet. But to understand how I ended up in that parking lot, I have to take you back. His name was Derek Whitlock. At least, that's the name I married. I was 28, fresh out of a divorce that had gutted me, working the front desk at a dental office in Highlands Ranch, and convinced that love was something that happened to other women. Then this man returned a wallet I'd dropped in the parking lot of a King Soopers, and instead of just handing it over, he'd already organized my receipts by date. I couldn't help it, he said. I'm a numbers guy. I laughed. I married that laugh, honestly. 8 months later, we were standing in front of a judge because, he said, big weddings were for people who needed an audience to believe them. I should have caught that. I didn't. For 5 years, it was good. Derek was an accountant. Quiet, allergic to attention, the kind of man who paid in cash and kept his head down in family photos. I thought it was humility. We bought a little ranch house off Vickers Drive, and on Sunday mornings he'd make eggs and read me the worst Zillow listings out loud in funny voices. That was my favorite version of him, the one who didn't know I was watching. The first crack was so small I almost feel stupid telling you. It was March. He got a text at dinner, glanced down, and turned the phone face down on the table in one smooth motion, like a man swatting a fly. He'd never done that before. Derek left his phone everywhere, on the bathroom counter, on the arm of the couch. But that night, it went face down, and something in me went very quiet. I rationalized it. Of course I did. Work stress, tax season, a difficult client. That's what you tell yourself. But then the cologne changed. Derek had worn the same drugstore stuff for years. I used to tease him about it. Suddenly, it was something darker, more expensive, the kind of scent a man doesn't pick out for himself. And the late nights started landing on the same day every week. Thursdays. Always Thursdays. Inventory reconciliation, he'd say, and kiss my forehead, and I'd nod like an idiot. My best friend Rachel, she cuts hair on Pearl Street in Boulder and has never once in 15 years softened a single thing to spare my feelings. Rachel was the one who said it out loud. We were splitting a bottle of cheap Pinot on her back porch in April, and I was doing my little routine, defending him, and she just set her glass down and said, "Sophie, honey, you don't reorganize your whole cologne and your whole calendar for inventory." I told her she was being dramatic. Then I drove home and lay awake next to him, listening to him breathe, and I started watching. Here's the thing nobody warns you about. Once you start watching, you can't stop. I noticed a name, Marisol, written on a sticky note in his car, with a phone number, in handwriting that wasn't his. I noticed he'd started locking his phone with a code I didn't know. And one Thursday in May, I followed him, sat 3 cars back in a Target parking lot off Academy, and watched him walk into a wine bar and hug a woman who was not me. A long hug, the kind with a hand on the lower back. And still, God help me, I drove home and told myself it could be a client, a coworker, something. I gave it one more breath of denial because the alternative meant my whole life was a set I'd been living on. The denial died on a Tuesday. I was looking for the spare car key in his nightstand. That's all, just a key. And underneath a folded sweater, I found a second phone. Cheap, prepaid, the screen already lit because a message had just come in. I didn't even have to unlock it. Right there on the lock screen. Last night was everything. I hate that you have to go home to her. And below that, a row of texts, the most recent one from Marisol that just said, "Soon, you promised." I sat down on the edge of our bed. I remember the exact texture of the comforter under my palms, that nubby gray fabric we'd argued about at the store. I remember the light coming through the blinds in stripes across the floor. And I remember thinking, with this strange, cold clarity, I am not going to scream. I am not going to throw this phone. It wasn't the affair that broke me. It was the casualness of it. Last night was everything. Like I was a chore he had to get back to. I didn't cry. I made a list. I walked into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. Mascara fine, hair fine. A 33-year-old woman who just found out she was the other woman in her own marriage. And I made a decision right there. He was never going to see it coming. Because the version of me he knew, she was already gone. The next morning, I kissed him goodbye like nothing had happened. He said, "Love you, Soph," and grabbed his keys. And I smiled and set it back, and the second his car cleared the driveway, I called a divorce attorney named Brian Castellano, whose name Rachel had given me. By that afternoon, I'd opened a checking account he didn't know existed and moved exactly half of our shared savings into it. My half, nothing more, because I wanted clean hands. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a quiet little machine. I photographed the second phone. I screenshotted bank statements. I found out who Marisol was. Marisol Reyes, a paralegal at a firm downtown, 31, the kind of pretty that photographs well. And Brian, my attorney, looked at everything I'd gathered and said something I'll never forget. He said, "Sophie, this is more than enough for the divorce. But there's something off about your husband's records, and before you sign anything, I want you to let me bring in someone." That someone was a private investigator named Hannah Pruitt, former county records clerk, switched to PI work, the kind of woman who answers a question with 3 more questions. She told me it would take a week to run Derek's background. Standard stuff, she said, for the financial settlement. I almost told her not to bother. I almost just signed the papers and walked. I'm so glad I didn't. Brian had set the date. We were going to confront him together, civilized, at a quiet steakhouse off Tejon Street where Derek liked to take clients, somewhere he couldn't make a scene without humiliating himself. I picked Thursday. Of course I picked Thursday. I wore the navy dress. I brought one printed photo of that lock screen in my purse, folded once. He showed up cheerful, ordered a bourbon, started telling me about a client who couldn't read a spreadsheet, and I let him finish. Then I slid the photo across the white tablecloth and watched my husband's face fall apart in stages. First, confusion. What is this? Then the denial, fast and reflexive. Sophie, that's not what you think. Then the anger, low and mean. Were you going through my things? Like I was the criminal. Then the panic when I told him about the second account and the attorney and the fact that Marisol had texted him soon while he was supposedly reconciling inventory. And finally, the pleading. He reached for my hand across the table and said, "Baby, please, we can fix this. You don't understand the pressure I've been..." And I just looked at him and said the only thing I'd rehearsed. "Derek, I already signed. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to say goodbye to a man I'm starting to think I never actually met." I meant it as a line, a clean exit. I had no idea how literally true it was. Because that's when my phone buzzed. Hannah, the PI. And because I'd had enough of his face, I stepped outside into the parking lot to take it, leaving him there with his bourbon and the photo. "Sophie," Hannah said, and her voice was different, careful. "I need you to sit down somewhere. Are you sitting?" The Social Security number on my husband's records, she said, was first issued in Ohio in 1986 to a man who, according to every public record, had died in a boating accident on Lake Erie in 2017. The real Derek Whitlock had been dead for 7 years. The man I married had simply picked up his name, his number, his clean credit history, and walked into a new life, my life. I remember leaning against the brick wall of that steakhouse and laughing, one short, ugly laugh, because of course. Of course, the cologne and the cash and the no big wedding and the head turned away in every photograph. He wasn't humble. He was hiding. Hannah said the real Derek had a sister, and the sister had been quietly looking for answers about her brother's death for years, because the body was never recovered. And when Hannah's records request pinged a flag, that sister had finally gotten a phone number for the man using her dead brother's identity. Her name was Olivia, and she wanted to meet me, which is how I ended up in that Denny's parking lot off I-25 at 11 o'clock at night in the sideways October rain, watching a stranger cry in a booth by the window. Olivia Whitlock had her brother's same gray eyes. She slid a photo across the table, the real Derek, grinning on a dock, a good face, a kind face. And then she told me the part Hannah hadn't. There had been someone before me. A woman in Cheyenne 4 years back who'd also been married to Derek Whitlock, who'd also started asking questions about his money, and who had then, very conveniently, fallen down a flight of stairs. I didn't sleep that night. I called Hannah, who called Brian, who called a detective he knew, and within 72 hours, my civilized divorce became a federal interest. They picked him up at his apartment, the apartment I didn't know he'd rented, on a Sunday morning. Marisol, it turned out, had also started asking him about his money. I think about that sometimes. I think she has no idea I might be the reason she's still walking around. That was 18 months ago. I go by my maiden name now, Sophie Aldridge. I live in a smaller place in Manitou Springs with windows that face the morning, and I've gotten good at making eggs the way he used to. Except I read the bad Zillow listings out loud to nobody, in funny voices, just for me. People keep waiting for me to be more broken than I am. But here's what I learned, and it's the only wisdom I've got. You don't recover from something like this. You don't get the old self back. You just get very, very good at carrying it, until one day you notice the weight has become a kind of strength. Olivia and I still talk. We got her brother a real headstone last spring. And sometimes, late at night, I think about that woman crying in the window of the Denny's, how I almost signed the papers and walked away clean, never knowing. And I'm grateful, in this twisted way, that he cheated, because the affair is what made me start watching. And watching is what saved my life. The clock in my chest is quiet now, and these days, I'm the one looking in through the glass.